Hello, I'm Jay Wilde, and 2 years ago I gave my cows to a sanctuary because I no longer wanted to be involved in animal farming.
Ranchers across the American West have learned to live with one hard truth. Creeks dry up, and there's nothing to be done about it. That's what Jay Wilde believed too for most of his life. However, after remembering something from his own childhood, he made one small change, and his dead creek came back to life. What did he actually do, and why did it work so well that it happened again on another ranch 1,000 miles away? Stay with us as we uncover the whole story.
And it was actually a cattle farm that you have, isn't it?
Yes, it's been an organic beef farm for about 15 years. Previously it was a dairy farm.
The land that kept running dry. Jay Wilde's family had worked the same land in Idaho since 1933. You see, it was no small piece. It was 10,000 acres near a small town called Preston, and this very land has been passed down through 4 generations. By the time Wilde was running the cattle himself, the ranch had one problem that showed up every single summer, right on schedule. That problem was that the ranch always ran out of water. It was not a periodic challenge. In fact, every August without fail, the creek that fed his herd turned into dry gravel. Wilde had to haul water out to his cattle just to keep them alive, driving tanks to fields that used to have their own water. He watched cows crowd around a trough that never should have had to exist. He had seen this happen as a boy. Now he was watching it happen again as a grown man on the same land his grandfather worked, with the same creek failing him the same way, year after year. For most of his life, he thought that the land was just some dry old ground and nothing could be done to change that. Every rancher near him thought the same thing, but all of that changed when he realized something that altered his reality. The realization didn't come from a report or something he had read. It came from a childhood memory. Years earlier, this very creek had been home to beavers, although he couldn't say exactly when they disappeared or who got rid of them, but he could guess. Ranchers across the West had spent generations trapping beavers off their land, treating them as pests instead of something worth keeping. But the timing lined up in his head. No beavers, no water. For a man who had spent his whole life seeing beavers as a nuisance, that was a hard thing to sit with. It meant the drought wasn't only about weather, some of it was a choice his own family had made without knowing what it would cost them decades later. So Wilde did something almost no rancher in his position ever does. He picked up the phone and called a university. The person Jay Wilde reached out to was Joe Wheaton, a river researcher who had spent years studying how to bring beavers back to streams that had lost them. Wheaton didn't promise a quick fix. He was honest from the start. Rebuilding a dead stream takes years, longer than most working ranchers are willing to wait, and longer than most can afford to risk on land that still has to pay its way every season. Starting in 2014, the two men began the slow work of making Birch Creek livable for beavers again. This creek eventually flows into the Bear River and from there into the Great Salt Lake. That meant changing the way the land was managed before a single beaver ever showed up. Cattle had to be kept away from the banks, so the willows and grasses could grow back after decades of being eaten down every summer. There was no dramatic change in year 1 or even year 2. It was a bet. If you rebuild the habitat first, the beavers do the rest, one dam at a time, with no blueprint and no crew, just an animal doing what it has done for millions of years if you give it a reason to stay. 5 years in, that bet paid off and the numbers were bigger than anyone expected. By 2019, along that same stretch of creek, researchers counted more than 200 active beaver dams. 10 years earlier, that number would have sounded made up. In 100-meter section of the creek, the number of Bonneville cutthroat trout, a species that had been in serious trouble, jumped from just 5 fish in the early 20s to 170. And for the first time since Wilde was a boy, the creek ran all 12 months of the year. No dry gravel in August, no hauling water to thirsty cattle. But it did not end there. It's worth being careful here about what that actually proves. A creek running all year and a growing trout population are not automatically the same story. One is water, the other is water plus habitat plus time, and figuring out exactly how much credit goes to the beavers versus the change in grazing is harder than it looks. What can be said clearly is this: the stretch of Birch Creek that Wilde manages went from drying out every summer to running without stopping. And that only happened after the beavers came back, not before. Word travels fast when a dead creek comes back to life. Wilde's ranch did not stay a quiet private success for long. Researchers began showing up to study it in person, including a team connected to a NASA satellite mapping project who visited in the summer of 2022 to check their satellite images of rewilded land against what was actually happening on the ground. A ranch that once hauled water in August had quietly become a case study for scientists trying to understand how land recovers from drought, watched all the way from space. But Wilde's ranch is just one property on one creek in one part of Idaho. One rancher with a good memory and a phone isn't proof of anything on its own. The real question, the one that actually matters if you're not Jay Wilde, is whether what happened on his land was luck, or whether it's something that can happen anywhere a rancher is willing to try it. To answer that, you have to look at what happened somewhere else entirely. 1,500 miles away on a creek in northeastern Nevada, a young cowboy holding a case of dynamite was about to find out the hard way, and what happened on his ranch turns out even stranger than Wilde's. The creek he tried to blow up. That cowboy was John Griggs, and in 1990 his very first job was to carry a case of dynamite out to a creek and blow up a beaver dam. He didn't know much about explosives. He knew one rule, and that was to keep the dynamite and the blasting caps apart, so nothing goes off by accident. Out at the creek, sticks flew into the air and the booms were loud. Looking back now, Griggs admits the whole thing barely worked. Nobody stopped him. Nobody questioned it. In 1990, this was just the job. Ranchers saw beavers as pests. Some called them worse than that. The creek he was blowing up was called Maggie Creek in northeastern Nevada. And just like Wilde's Creek in Idaho, it was in bad shape. Every summer it ran fast and shallow, and by August it dried into bare gravel. The willows along the banks were gone, and the water became too warm for fish. Nobody connected any of this to the missing beavers because almost nobody working that land had ever seen a beaver there in their whole life. You can't miss something you've never known. 13 years later, something happened that nobody planned. The beavers came back on their own. As shocking as this sounds, it is true. They simply walked in from a nearby creek looking for water and food. A federal biologist named Carol Evans had set the changes in motion years earlier. She had only hoped for a few small ponds. What actually happened went far beyond that. Here's how it started. In the early 1970s, a nearby gold mine had to pump huge amounts of groundwater out of the ground. Federal law said the company had to make up for that somehow, so in 1993, it helped pay for a project to fix the Maggie Creek watershed, working with the Bureau of Land Management. The goal on paper was simple: fix the water. Nobody involved was thinking about beavers yet. Evans had a different idea than most people would expect from a government biologist. She didn't ask ranchers to run fewer cattle. She asked them to change when and where the cattle grazed. In the hottest months, cows naturally head for shade and water. That means they spend the whole summer standing in the most fragile strip of land on the ranch, eating the young willow shoots that need that exact season to grow strong enough to survive winter. Evans asked ranchers to move cattle to higher ground in the heat, then let them back down to the creek once the willows had gone dormant for the year. John Griggs stayed on through all of this and became ranch manager by 1998. For years, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly, things began to change in ways you would only notice if you only pay close attention. Native grasses came back first. Flowering plants followed. Willows began to grow again along Susie Creek, a nearby stream, by around 1996. Researchers guessed it would take 8 to 12 years before the plants were healthy enough to draw a beaver back at all. Two things had to heal before a beaver would ever come home. The willows had to grow back thick enough to survive being eaten, and the water table had to rise close enough to the surface for those willow roots to reach it. Neither of these could be rushed. Nobody could watch it happening day to day. It just happened, quietly year after year, while the cattle kept moving on the new schedule. Then around 2003, at dusk on Susie Creek, something moved in the water. The beavers had found their way home, just as Evans hoped they might, though she never promised it would happen. Once they arrived, the numbers grew fast. By 2006, surveyors counted 107 beaver dams along a 20-mile stretch of Maggie Creek. 4 years later, that number had climbed to 271. And through some of the driest years this part of the country had seen in centuries, a creek that used to vanish every summer now ran with water all 12 months of the year. In 2018, two researchers named Emily Fairfax and Eric Small studied parts of these same creeks, comparing stretches with beaver dams to stretches without. Their study, published in the science journal Ecohydrology, found that the dammed stretches had far more plant growth and far more water moving through the ground than the stretches without dams nearby. That wasn't down to rainfall. Both stretches got the same weather. The only real difference was the animal. It's worth being honest about what isn't fully settled here. Scientists still can't say for sure whether the ponds these dams created actually cooled the water enough to help the fish, or whether they simply gave fish somewhere to survive instead of a dry gravel bed. Nobody has published a clear count of fish in Maggie Creek from before and after the beavers came back. The way Wilde's Creek in Idaho eventually got tracked, habitat coming back and a fish population actually growing are two different things, and only one of them has solid proof behind it here. There's also a harder question sitting underneath all of this. The grazing changed and the beavers came back in the very same years, on the very same land. Figuring out exactly how much of the recovery belongs to the beavers and how much belongs to simply keeping cattle off the creek in July is nearly impossible. Even the scientists who studied it admit that much. What isn't in question is what Griggs saw with his own eyes. The same creek he once tried to blow apart with dynamite found a way to put itself back together using nothing but sticks, mud, and 13 years of patience nobody asked it to have. And Maggie Creek wasn't the only place this was starting to happen. So stay with us as we look at why this doesn't always work and what happens when it goes wrong. Why this doesn't always work, limitations of beaver dams. Not every ranch has a happy ending like this. Some streams are too steep, some are packed with rock instead of soft dirt, and a beaver dam simply cannot hold in that kind of ground. A wildlife biologist in Nevada has warned other ranchers not to expect beavers to fix every stream they own. He's right to say that. Nature does not work the same way on every piece of land, even land that looks similar from the road. Then there's the neighbor problem. A beaver does not read a property line, and it does not care whose land it's flooding. It will plug a road culvert without warning, and the water backs up until the county road washes out. It will dam a ditch that feeds someone else's hayfield, turning a family's income into a swamp almost overnight. The man standing in that flooded field, watching 4 generations of work sink underwater, is not being unreasonable. He's doing simple math on his own land, and sometimes that math does not work out in the beaver's favor. Even now, some states still remove or kill beavers they consider a nuisance, thousands of them every year, which shows just how mixed feelings about this animal still are, even in places where success stories like Wilde's and Griggs's are already well known. There's also a cost that gets left out of the success stories. Both Wilde and Griggs gave up something before they got anything back. Wilde had to keep hauling water for years while he waited on a bet with no guarantee attached. Griggs gave up his ranch's best summer grazing land for close to a decade before the first beaver ever came back. That's not a small sacrifice for either man. It's years of lost income and extra work on an idea that could have failed. Completely. Not every rancher can afford to give up that much land or that much time, no matter how good the payoff might eventually be. Telling a struggling rancher that he simply lacks vision when he can't afford to gamble years of income on an idea isn't fair, because it's easy to praise patience when you're not the one going without. And here's a problem almost nobody wants to say out loud. So keep watching. On both ranches, more than one thing changed at the same time. The grazing changed, and the beavers came back in the very same years on the very same land. Nobody has ever fully separated how much credit belongs to each one. The best scientists could do was compare stretches with beavers to stretches without them inside the same managed system. That's good, careful work, but it still isn't proof that beavers alone did this, in Nevada or in Idaho. Some of the recovery clearly belongs to keeping cattle off the creek in the hottest months. Some belong to the animal. Nobody has drawn a clean line between the two, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. That uncertainty doesn't erase what actually happened, though. Wilde's Creek runs all year now. Griggs's Creek runs through August when it never used to. 2 different states, 2 different ranchers, 2 different creeks, and the same basic result. That's what makes this story more than luck. A single ranch coming back to life could be an accident. 2 ranches 1,000 miles apart, both healing the same way after the same kind of change, starts to look a lot more like a pattern. Don't go anywhere, because there's one more detail in this story that says more than any statistic could. Griggs still wears a hat made of beaver fur. The same material that once wiped out beavers across an entire continent now sits on the head of the man who champions them at ranching conferences across the country. He's never taken it off. Call it strange if you want. It might also be the most honest object in the whole story. A daily reminder standing right on top of his head of the mistake his generation walked into without ever meaning to. So what happens next? Carol Evans has retired. Griggs is well into his 60s now, and even Wilde is getting older too. A rangeland scientist who studied these systems put it plainly: land like this can spiral in either direction, and 30 years of careful work can come apart in as little as 10 if the wrong choices get made. The beavers hold up their end of the bargain without being asked twice. They just build. They don't need supervision, and they don't take days off. The only weak link left in the whole system is us. Go stand at either creek on a summer evening in Idaho or in Nevada, and you'll find a pond sitting where old maps still show nothing but dry gravel. Somewhere in the middle of that water, an animal is quietly closing up a leak, working the same way it has for thousands of years, on land where people once believed it didn't belong at all. The bigger lesson reaches far past cattle ranches. Griggs said it best himself: it took all of us to make this mistake in the first place. Not just ranchers, not just the government, not just anyone pointing fingers from the outside. And it will take all of us paying attention and staying willing to change to keep it from happening again. The American West never actually ran out of water. It ran out of the things that used to slow the water down. Every one of those things is still willing to come back the moment people stop standing in the way. What do you think? Is this the future of drought recovery in the West? Or does it only work for a lucky few? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, click the next video on your screen and you'll enjoy it.